Episode 286, Turf Wars. I think we all understand what we're here to talk about today, Chris said, looking at Jessup. But I'll make it clear now. Chris opened the door and said, "If we want to control the underground world of Baltimore, we accept that we will be at war with the Clifton family. We think that the time has finally come to decide this matter." Jessup laughed softly and asked, "Do you think your family has the strength to defeat the Cliftons?" Chris shrugged slightly and said, "Of course. Even if we don't win, we wouldn't miss this opportunity to have a showdown. If you don't think the Stedmans are worthy opponents, that's fine. We'll have a real fight, and then we'll all know where we stand." Chris's determined attitude surprised Jessup, and he felt slightly less confident. "Mr. Stedman, stop spouting nonsense and let's get down to business," Rufus said to Chris. He no longer saw any reason to be polite to him. "So how do you want this fight between our two families to proceed?" Chris ignored Rufus's jibe. He was there to negotiate. "Your father has already thought about it, hasn't he? Let's hear what he's got to say," Jessup said. Jessup knew that Chris's father, Art, wouldn't have sent his son to pick a fight with him without careful consideration. Chris looked at Jessup with respect when he realized that he had predicted his father's actions. Jessup was a man with a lifetime of experience and intuition. He said, "We have 3 possibilities to suggest. I'll give you our ideas and then you can choose." Chris continued, "The first possibility is that the two families physically fight each other until one side surrenders or everyone dies." Jessup had also thought of this option but dismissed it. As the two most powerful families in the underground world of Baltimore, it was likely that neither would concede, so a lot of people would die. The loss could be tremendous. In addition, this story would be so newsworthy that even their families would not be able to keep it under wraps. If news of the underworld fight got out, the reputations of both families and their business empires would be destroyed. No matter which side won the fight, the damage to both families could be disastrous. He therefore felt that it was a very high-risk option with both sides likely to suffer. "What else?" Jessup asked. He had too much experience as a leader to only hear the first suggestion. "The second is to decide through a 1-to-1 fight. Each family chooses one man to represent them, and the 2 men fight to the death in one of the underground fighting rings," Chris said. Jessup was familiar with this option. The victory or defeat of the warrior represented the victory or defeat of his employer. That method was the most commonly used to settle large-scale turf wars in the underground world and to determine gang boundaries. Jessup had predicted that the Stedman family would suggest this option, so he had already asked Alex if he would represent his family. "You have a third way?" he asked. He couldn't think of a third option, so he was curious to hear what the Stedman family might suggest. "Of course we do, and I think it may be the best option for the Clifton family," Chris said. Jessup looked at him curiously as he waited for him to continue. "The third way is..." Chris started, then paused slightly, stared at Jessup and whispered, "The Clifton family admits defeat right now and proclaims our family, the Stedman family, as the bosses of the Baltimore underworld scene." Jessup was so furious that he started coughing violently. Chris had been deliberately provocative. "Dad, are you okay?" Rufus quickly bent down to check on his father. Jessup shook his head. "Chris, you piece of shit! Get out of here!" he yelled at Chris. He was deeply insulted by Chris's display of disrespect. Chris answered, "Calm down. We're just thinking what's best for your family. If the Clifton family is willing to withdraw from the underground world of Baltimore, the Stedman family will pay you $5 million. Not only will your family receive money, but your reputation will remain unharmed. Surely that's a fair deal?" Jessup asked, "Does your family really believe that the Cliftons will lose the fight?" Chris replied smugly, "No, of course, not definitely. But I would say it's certainly probable. There's maybe 90% chance that the Cliftons will lose." He continued, "I must remind you that the Blood Brothers gang in Baltimore is immense and powerful, and that they will support my family. I assume you've heard of them?" Jessup thought he was right. His family has the support of the Blood Brothers. He said, "Of course the Blood Brothers are a large gang and they have a lot of skilled fighters. By all means, have them on your side, but don't assume that your family will win." "So you're not going to concede? You still want to fight our family?" Chris confirmed. "Of course," Jessup replied. "Okay, great." Chris stood up and said, "In 3 days' time, we'll meet at the Clifton Underground Boxing Ring. We'll be waiting for you with your fighter. We're looking forward to it. Goodbye until then." Chris turned and left. "Dad, are you okay?" Rufus asked as he looked at his father's anxious face. He was also very worried. "I'm fine," Jessup replied. "Please, fetch Mr. Ambrose." "Of course," Rufus answered. Then he opened the door of the study and said to Alex, "Mr. Ambrose, please come in." Jessup looked at Alex and asked, "Mr. Ambrose, did you hear what was agreed with the Stedman family? Hopefully I don't need to repeat it. I want you to fight for the Clifton family. What do you think?" "First, can you please tell me who the Blood Brothers are? Can we beat them? And what'll happen if we lose?" Alex asked. He knew that Jessup wanted his allegiance, but he had some doubts in his mind. The Blood Brothers is the largest gang in Baltimore. They have a lot of good fighters and several martial arts experts, skilled professional fighters. They are a huge gang, and it will be very difficult to defeat them. Listening to his analysis of the situation brought home to Jessup how bleak their prospects were. The fight will only end by the death of one opponent, or in the unlikely event that one fighter admits defeat, he explained. After a brief thought, Alex said, "Mr. Clifton, I promise I will fight for you." "Are you sure? If you don't want to, I understand and I won't force you," Jessup said. Alex didn't want to fight, but he explained his decision. "I will fight because of Debbie. I know that if anything happened to her family, Debbie would be devastated. I promised her that I will never let her feel sad or afraid again, so I must help her family. Besides, I already feel part of the Clifton family." Listening to Alex's heartfelt words, Jessup was moved. He felt certain that his granddaughter had found herself a good man. "Good," he replied slowly. Now that you're officially a member of the Clifton family, I'll call you Alex. Now, go and get something to eat. Then we can meet with the family to discuss how we're going to beat the Stedmans." Alex nodded. Speaking of families reminded him of how he had been forced out of his own family and how much he missed them. It made him feel quite melancholy. Jessup told him, "Alex, over the next 2 days, we'll get as much information as we can about the fighters that the opposition are considering. On the day of the fight, we'll all be there to support you except Debbie. I don't want her to know anything about it." "I understand," Alex nodded. He had already decided not to tell Debbie anything about the fight. If she knew that his life was in danger, she would be very worried, and he didn't want to cause her any distress. If he did die in the ring, he could imagine how devastated Debbie would be. He had to make sure that didn't happen. Chris was sitting in his Mercedes-Benz, feeling relaxed. He was pleased with how things had gone with Jessup Clifton. He raced the Mercedes back to his father's villa, pushed open the door and walked inside. Art was sitting on the sofa, smoking. The ashtray in front of him was already overflowing. He wasn't worried about Chris's negotiations with the Clifton family. He just felt that the day when he would take over running the entire Baltimore Underground was getting close. As he imagined the negotiations taking place between his son and Jessup Clifton, he couldn't help feeling excited. Chris walked up to Art and said excitedly, "Dad, our negotiations went well. As you predicted, Jessup agreed to a one-on-one fight." "Good," Art said. "Everything is under my control. No matter which way the Clifton family chooses, we will defeat them." "I think they'll send their best fighter, Paul Novak, to fight for them. Is there anyone in the Blood Brothers gang that can beat him?" Chris asked. Art replied calmly, "Don't worry. Since Tyson Slade has promised to help us take over the Baltimore Underground world, he'll definitely send us his best fighter. Otherwise, we won't help his gang expand on the East Coast." He sat on the sofa, pondered for a moment, then picked up his phone and called Tyson Slade. Tyson answered, "Hello, Mr. Stedman. How can I help you?" His voice was so deep and masculine that it sounded as hard as a rock.